Let me sweep back to that other word, nerve. I know, because I follow you, how deep your respect and attention to Alexander Solzhenitsyn is. If he'll have a hero, obviously he is it. Now, in the Soviet Union, if Solzhenitsyn writes a small note or something, he gets tossed off into a gulag for 9 years or more. If a man looks the wrong way in China, he can be put some damn camp, and in Korea we won't even go into it. In those countries, if you want to say something, even if it's merely innocuous, you really have to have courage. Solzhenitsyn should be called Stalin. He had to steal. Mm-hmm. Over here, when, okay, we have a trans activist group, let's name the one that's in the thing. Yeah. And you almost innately know that this is absurd. And you say, well, I don't think I'm going to say that's absurd. What are we afraid of? We fight wars and say we gave all our soldiers this, that we would preserve democracy and freedom of speech. There is no loss if you decide to challenge in terms of any contrast with the totalitarian systems, where if you said something, you really did pay a price. Yeah. Worst thing you can do over here is lose a job.
Well, you can be hauled in front of quasi-judicial tribunes as well, and I mean, they're certainly willing to do that. I think the human rights tribunals should, in my opinion, they should be obliterated.
They're a travesty.
Yes, we're setting up these quasi-judicial inquisitions in all sorts of institutions.
And ideologically constituted, because I read the biographies of some of the people who were appointed to them.
Yeah.
And no one can be a judge in their own cause. And in this context, it's the cause people judging the causes.
Yeah, precisely.
But
I mean, look what's happening in British Columbia with this case. What's the person's name?
Jessica or Jonathan? I prefer Jonathan.
I think we'll go with Jonathan, and we'll see if they'll haul us in front of the Ontario Human Rights Commission.
We will go together.
Good. That would be too much to bear, undoubtedly, but it would be interesting.
But no, he's got 16 people. A good portion of them are immigrant women.
Yeah.
He is insisting that they wax his penis and testicles. If he's got hair on the first, it's a bit of a worry. And he's got 16 of them under charge. And I asked the question, if 16 people are of this mind and one person is of this, which is the more likely to be off?
Yeah, well, it seems irrelevant. And I mean, it's a consequence, you know. One of the things I pointed out with Bill C-16 was that it contained multiple internal contradictions, especially in the background policies, which I had read in quite a bit of detail. They were formulated in Ontario, although the federal government removed the link on their website to those policies after I pointed out the fact that that link existed, which I thought was unbelievably underhanded and still believe so. But Carl Jung once said that internal contradictions are played out in the world as fate. You know, is that the thing about propositions, if they're accurate, is that they represent real states of being in the world. And if you entertain a set of propositions that are internally contradictory, then you're going to run yourself into all sorts of sharp objects and dead ends. And that's exactly what's happening. And it every time, and I've thought this really for 3 years, every time you think that there's no possible way that this can get more absurd, then one more example comes up where it's more absurd. And I would say the situation in BC is precisely that. I mean, one of the women that he's persecuting, because I think he and this terrible bureaucracy is persecuting, was an immigrant woman, I believe she was Muslim, who had an aesthetics business in her own home, and as a consequence of the negative publicity, or the publicity and the pressure, she shut down her business. And God only knows what that means for her family, and for her. And you were asking about courage earlier. You know, one of the things that I have watched quite frequently is the way that people respond to being mobbed on Twitter.
Yeah.
You know, now I've almost stopped looking at Twitter. It's been about 3 months that I've taken a Twitter hiatus, let's say. I still post, I don't even have my password anymore. I send what I want to post to a third party and they post it because it keeps me out of the...
An antiseptic distance.
That's right, exactly. And that's exactly the right way of thinking about it. You know, people, civilized people, and I mean that in civilized, socialized people, cannot tolerate being mobbed. Because,
no, they can't.
Because, and there's a reason for that. You see, you said, with regards to the British Columbia Human Rights Tribunal, you know, if there's 16 people on one side and one on the other, you might be thinking that the 16 people are right.
More or less.
Right. But then you think of the situation where you've said something on Twitter and, you know,
6,000
1,000 people
Yeah.
mob you publicly. I mean, your first response, your first response is going to be to examine your own conscience and see
Yep.
how you transgressed. It's not really much different psychologically. I mean, it's lesser, I suppose, but it's not that much different than waking up one morning and coming to your door and finding a mob of your neighbors angrily aggregated on your lawn. You know, it's a terrible shock for people, and it really hurts them. You know, they're often, by all accounts, you know, damaged for lengthy periods of time by this, and their first impulse is to apologize, which is truly the wrong thing. Like the right thing to do.
It's stand.
Well, the right thing to do is to understand that if you haven't done anything wrong, you don't apologize. Now that's very difficult.
Yeah,
it's very difficult. And then to wait, because if you wait 2 weeks, people will come to your defense.
Yeah, they will.
But it takes the people who will come to your defense 2 weeks to get their act together, where it takes the activists who are unbelievably organized 15 seconds to mob you.
Well, there's two points to draw out of there. First of all, because you have now been almost fire hosed into the world of celebrity, multimedia, and vast attention. I've dabbled in a lesser zone for a long while, so you adjust to the kind of swirl, okay? But what I've never forgotten, and I'm serious, is that people who are not in it at all, my father, or the mechanic down the road, or the doctor over here, doesn't have to be class. If you haven't had media, and if you haven't adjusted to it, and suddenly your name, and I'm just backing up your point, your name suddenly becomes the center of some great Twitter snowstorm in pejorative terms, and people are speaking of you with the most vulgar responses. It is a terror. It isn't to me, because I dismiss it, but people who have not experienced it, it is really, really, really something that it's an unbearable pain.
Yes.
And they bring it down with club force and the great megaphones of national networks in the States, etc. You can expunge a person's personality with this kind of brutality.